My name is Dan Schmoldt. I'm with the National Institute of Food and Agriculture in Washington, D.C., and I'd like to welcome you all to this grantsmanship workshop here, which, as you can see by the title, is focusing on partnerships. And we have a really wonderful partnership here today with North Carolina A&T, and we're really excited to be here. I had an opportunity to come down here in August as sort of a pre-planning visit to A&T, and it was really a pleasant experience. I've enjoyed working with the staff here, and I think they've done a fabulous job, and I think we're going to have a really good workshop today. So before I go into the details of what we're going to do today in the next 15 minutes before we bring our first panel up, I'd like to ask Dr. Shirley Hymon-Parker to come up here and give an A&T welcome to both the audience here and the offsite audience. Shirley?
Okay. Well, good morning. As Dan has indicated, I'm Shirley Hymon-Parker. I'm the Associate Dean for Research here in the School of Ag and Environmental Sciences at A&T. And I would like to welcome our on-site as well as our off-site participants to this webinar. I have to admit I am truly delighted and honored that you have chosen to spend this time with us today in a place that our alumni affectionately call Aggie Land. To our off-site participants who may not be familiar with North Carolina A&T State University, we are a doctoral research institution, and we're located, as some may know, in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is in the central Piedmont of the Tar Heel State. North Carolina A&T State University is also one of 18 1890 universities that are scattered throughout the southeastern United States. And I will also say that we are also proud to be among the over 100 historically black colleges and universities in the nation. As I'd mentioned, we are part of the 1890 communities, and like our other sister institutions, North Carolina A&T State University, our agriculture and extension efforts are geared towards serving limited resource minority farmers, rural communities, and individuals. Today, our theme, as Dan has already mentioned to you, is partnerships. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, also referred to as NIFA, for partnering with us today to conduct this webinar. I'd also like to selfishly take this opportunity to put in a plug for North Carolina A&T's our research initiatives. And we are also working on trying to increase our partnership efforts. And as such, there are 4 areas that we are asking for partners to come and join us. And those are in the areas of childhood obesity, organic and sustainable agriculture, food security, and bioenergy. So again, if you have any interest in partnering with us in these research initiatives, I'd ask that you contact me or any of the faculty within the School of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences and let us know of your interest in partnering. I'd like to also note that today we have a wonderful panel that will be working with us, not only the panel of colleagues, but also a panel of experts who are going to share with you their perspectives on partnerships. And as we know, basically this is the name of the game nowadays. Not only because of its ability to help us attract funding, but also because this is the way that we will be able to actually achieve strong and endured impacts that will help us to sustain our programs, our research, as well as our extension programs now and in the future. Now I'd just like to mention a word about the company that you're in today. We have some 400 people that have registered on-site as well as virtually for today's webinar. And Some of those individuals, while we would imagine, are mainly coming from the agriculture community, we also have individuals that are coming from public health agencies, also from city planners. We have some farm organizations, as well as some consultants. So as you can see, you're in great company today. And I want to extend a warm welcome to all of our participants. So now, without further ado, I'd like to turn our podium back over to our partner, Dr. Dan Schmoldt, who will now outline for you how to make the best of today's session. Thank you so very much for coming, and we hope that you find this session to be all that you expected it to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. That was a really nice introduction to partnerships, and better than I could have done, so I really thank you for doing that. Just a little bit about the agenda today. We're going to have, we had planned on having a couple panels, but as because of some scheduling issues and transportation and travel issues, we just have one, the first thing this morning, and it's one where we have a number of panelists talking about the review process and what they look for in proposals. And it is sort of a partnership when you bring an idea to an agency like NIFA or NSF or any other agency, and we work with experts, scientific experts, to evaluate those ideas. And so everybody working together, we try to come up with the best work to fund at that point in time. Another area of particular interest for our agency and many other agencies is the integration across functions, research, education, and extension. And so we're going to have a presentation talking about the partnership between those different functions. A key aspect of conducting science and having it deliver on the ground is realizing impacts. And oftentimes, there are a lot of impacts out there, but oftentimes those aren't marketed and promoted in the ways that do justice to the funding agencies, as well as the people doing the work and the people carrying out and trying to deliver on the ground. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to do a better job of marketing what we do in terms of writing impact statements. Then this afternoon, we're going to get a little bit more into the public-private partnerships that Shirley alluded to a little bit, and have a few presentations dealing with that topic. And then one of the few topics on the agenda where we're maybe a little bit program specific is related to the Food and Agriculture Science Enhancement grants as part of the AFRI program. Otherwise, this agenda is not NIFA grant program specific, and we think there's a lot to be learned by not focusing on grant programs per se, but developing the skill set that can make you better grant applicants. And one of the aspects of doing that we've seen in a number of instances in our agencies is the use of multi-state committees to get groups of people together with common interests and common ideas, and using that as a springboard to good grantsmanship. So that's sort of the agenda for today. On the website, and you've probably already seen it, I think it's right on the home page now, is the email address if you're watching virtually, or you can, if you're watching this later on archived, don't send emails. But if you're watching it live, you can send an email question during the presentation. Someone here will receive that, and the question will be posed to the speaker or the panelists to respond to. So please take advantage of that. Also on the website, if you, right on the home page now, well, I guess you were listening to this off-site, you already know you've connected. There is a connection link there for you. I was told by our technology people here at A&T that the PowerPoints are already available on the workshop website. The presentations, the audio-video, will be available before Christmas, probably fairly soon, but certainly by next week. So an early Christmas present for everybody. And again, I will ask the speakers to allow time as part of their talk to have questions at the end, hopefully at least 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes for questions at the end. So please try to maintain that timeline as you do speak. So I'd like to ask Tom Bewick to come up. Tom is also a national program leader with NIFA, and he's going to introduce the panelists and get the first session underway. Tom?
Thanks, Dan. As Dan said, I'm national program leader with the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Specialize in horticulture. I've directed a lot of programs over the years. I've been with NIFA now for 12 years. I'm a real veteran there. We have a high turnover rate because we're so underpaid. But anyway, and one of the things that we have realized over the years is that one of the best ways to be a successful grant applicant is to serve as a reviewer on one of our panels. And so we've asked 4 people to come today. And one of the things that it's very unusual for us to identify people who have served on a grant review panel for us. Confidentiality is the backbone of our review system. You know, they have identified themselves as reviewers on our panel. If you ask me, were they a reviewer, I'll tell you, ask them. I will not ever reveal the identity of a reviewer. So I would like to up front thank our 4 panelists this morning for identifying themselves as a reviewer and for sharing with you their experiences of, as a reviewer, what are the keys that they look for? What are the things that differentiate a successful application from a non-successful application? And so with that, I'll ask my panelists to come up. Dr. Paula Faulkner is from NC University, and so she's right from this area. Paula, thank you for being on the panel. Carl Sams is from the University of Tennessee, and Carl has graciously agreed to be here today. Penny Perkins-Viezi is from NC State University down in Kannapolis. Penny formerly was with ARS out in at Langston, Lane, Oklahoma, I'm sorry. And then finally, Frank Lowe's is the director of the IPM Center at NC State University and also a faculty in plant pathology. So what I've asked them to do is spend some brief time giving you their insights about, you know, what makes a good application, what do they look for, what are the things that jump out at them. So each one of them is going to do that, and then hopefully we'll have a lot of time for questions. So if you're in the virtual audience, please remember to use that email address, and then I will convey your question to the panelists. So Paula, why don't we start with you?
It's also very important to have the curriculum, vitas, the conflict of interest, and I must say that I have to give a better review to see if I have a conflict. On one occasion, there was a conflict that I wasn't aware of because the applicant had actually referenced me in their proposal. And so I was removed as a reviewer based on that. And I had no idea why I was removed because I didn't know the applicant, but they had cited me. So that's important for you to do. And as a reviewer and as an applicant, it's just important for you to make sure that all your supplemental forms are in place and the criteria of your key personnel are there as well.
Thank you. I would, of course, completely concur with the statement that you need to know the. Am I there? Can you hear in the back now? Okay. Obviously, you need to know the RFA, and you need to have read the instructions and follow the instructions fairly closely because it's not very impressive from the panel perspective if you are not following the RFA. if you have incomplete, if your application is incomplete. I'd like to back up just a little bit more from a perspective of where I was maybe the first grant that I wrote quite a few years ago. And you thought, as someone writing the grant, you have this image that this is a really fantastic idea. This is good. I'm impressed with this. All your colleagues are impressed with this. And then you put it in and you get these reviews back that are less than stellar. And you thought, well, these people just don't know what they're talking about. I mean, this idea, I'm a sort of self-confident person, as you can tell. And they obviously don't understand what a really good science project is. So after you do this once or twice, then you start figuring out that, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong. And then after serving on the panel, I can tell you what's going wrong is that when the proposals come across the panels, I think most of the people on this podium would probably agree that the vast majority of the proposals have a pretty good scientific idea in them. If they didn't, they probably wouldn't have been put forth. But there's a much smaller percentage of them that are very clearly written, very concise, follow the RFA, and that grab you. So as a panelist, when I look at the proposals, I look through the whole proposal, as was said by my colleague before. I generally, rather than reading the summary first, I actually look through the whole thing, sort of scan it pretty fast, see if they've got everything together, see how many typos there are and things like that, because that's sort of an organizational skill that if there's a whole lot of typos and poor grammar, it's the first dead giveaway that, well, this person's a little slack in how they put this together. Then I'll go back and read the summary, and if the summary doesn't really tell me what's in their idea and why is that idea important, and even more importantly, how is that idea going to progress science, progress the needs of this particular program? Does it fit this program, and is it going to be something that's really going to help a lot of people under this program? And have you clearly identified the partners, how the partners are going to fit together? If that summary grabs you and you've got a really good science idea there, then you've got the panelist on your side very, very early. Then the second step you start looking for is, okay, you have 15 people on this research with you. Do they all have a well-defined role? Is it very clear to me what each of them are doing, how they're going to execute their role, and more importantly, how these roles are going to blend together to solve the overall objective? If these are just 8 or 10 goals out separately to themselves, that's not really a good research project. That's 10 mediocre research projects that are strung together in one grant. So if you have a really good seamless organization, you've put the ideas together, you've told the panelists this is who's going to be working, here's this person's skill set, here's what they're going to bring to the grant, and here's how we're going to interact together to make this happen. So you put all those things together, you've got a great idea, and it's extremely well written and it's well organized. Then it starts becoming impressive, and you move up out of that. Yeah, most of these are pretty good scientific ideas, but you want to be up in that top 10 or 20% where it's a great idea that grabs people, it fits RFA, and all of these concepts are clearly tied together. Then you start getting a little closer to success. And unfortunately, I think the panelists here and all the people in Washington will agree that there's a lot of good proposals out there. There are very few really great proposals where everything just excels, but there's a lot of good proposals. So there is a big need out there and a lot of good science being done. And we, on the science side of it, on the PI side of it, just need to do a better job of addressing the issues to make it easier for the panelists to agree that yours is the great idea. So.
Okay, I'll try this. So first, definitely, I think you're getting the idea that the abstract is your gateway. You have to have a very appealing abstract, and it has to be extremely clear. And as Dr. Sands indicated, it also needs to adequately summarize what you're really going to do. One thing that hasn't been addressed yet is the rewrites. Many times these projects are submitted 2, 3, even 4 times again for funding. The kiss of death is to rebut what the panelists have pointed out and do it in a way that the panelists are pretty clear, you're pretty upset about it, and that you disagree strongly with their opinion. If you're putting it that way, more than likely the panelists are not going to give you a warm welcome. So make sure when you rebut the panelists' review that you do it in a very tactful way. If you disagree, point out the evidence that you have that maybe contrasts with their opinion. You can think whatever you want, but don't put it into words. The other thing, with these federal grants, there's a ton of paperwork, and we all complain about that, of course, the 24-page conflict of interest for starters. And people go, why do we need this? And the problem is, many times, if you've had any kind of connection at all with somebody on this project that you're proposing, there are people that sit there and go through these lists to make sure that the panelist is not going to be compromised. So they want to make sure that if you've at any point have had a paper in the last 3 years, or if you had a student in common or something like that, that there's not going to be a bias, or if you're from the same university. So try and make sure that you do have a good match. I've had a couple incidents where I looked through the conflict of interest, or I've even gone through the whole proposal and realized I knew this person. And then I have to say, hey, even if it wasn't on the conflict, I need to be taken off this proposal. So make sure you pay attention to details like that. Now, one of the things that hasn't been talked about is there are rankings that go up with these proposals for many panels. And they usually will fall into categories of the absolute dead idea, which they do not fund. So they basically are saying there's no scientific merit in what you have proposed. If you get a DNF, don't bother to resubmit it. If you get a medium score, which is very, very common, that means there's merit in the idea, but it needs a lot of work. If you have a high ranking, it's great. That's great. That means you're close to that money pot. But for whatever reason, and almost always with the one, the SCRA grants, it's because of the extension component, you have some work to do on that. It's not quite in the outstanding category. And even if you get an outstanding, you may not get the money. You could have 10 outstanding projects, and you only have enough money for the first 6. So don't be discouraged if you get an outstanding. It means you get a great proposal, and you might even want to think about submitting it to another agency, tweak it around a little bit to make sure it fits that, and then go forward with another category. So if you have a medium, and the other thing is, too, you might submit, I've had this happen to me several times. The first year it comes back as outstanding, you send it in again, it comes back as a medium. You're going, what did I do? What happened? Whose fault was this? And it's just a panel-to-panel decision. Sometimes, depending on the makeup of the panel, you have people who are more cognizant about what you're doing or what they want. Sometimes there's a difference in the RFA, a slight difference. It may be enough to kick it out, where they say, okay, last year we wanted to do genomic work. This year we have another priority. And maybe you didn't pay attention to that, or maybe you said, well, I'll take the risk and resubmit it. So don't get discouraged when you see that. Just go back and study on it again and see if there's some way around that maybe you should address.
Excellent. And I'll just comment, first of all, about the process and maybe say that a little bit more up front. And I think everybody needs to be highly encouraged about the process, that everybody who's on those panels, the panel managers, they take this very seriously. They take the limited federal dollars very seriously in terms of using it stewardly and using it well and putting it on the best projects. And then what I notice about panels is you have primary, secondary, tertiary reviewers. You have people that really, really take time to learn, and you also have externals. And I'm always impressed about generally how quickly proposals fall into these categories. And so I guess what I've learned when I've written a grant and I get a specific criticism, I think, well, they missed the mark. But you know what? My proposal still fell in a category, and it's not just because of that one thing. It's because the whole proposal needs additional work. So when I land a medium, I think I hurt myself by just thinking, oh, I have this one issue. It's not. Maybe the team wasn't strong enough, or so I just need to think freshly. I want to encourage people that the process really honors your work. And I think people seek to see the best in the work and in the panel, and the way it does fall into categories happens pretty quickly, and you feel pretty confident about the way things are categorized. So with that in mind, when I first look at a proposal, things have been clearly stated already, but really you're a salesperson, and you're selling an idea. But I think you got to be careful. You don't want to be a slick salesperson, right? You want to be a salesperson that's selling good science that addresses a real issue, and you have the right capacity to do it. And so that's kind of what I really look for as I'm going through this proposal. And a lot of times you get that right out of the abstract or the summary, or if it's a rebuttal to a review, then you feel like, yeah, you know what, they've really thought this through. They've really come back and made the work. And the other thing that I really look for, which is kind of nebulous sometimes, but I call it the context. And what I mean by that is, what's the literature saying? What is the current trends in the science, or what are the current trends in extension? And are they in it? Is this who they are? And I think that really adds high value. So, a couple times I know I've written like a small proposal one time for something that I knew I got the money, but it wasn't really us. It wasn't really our capacity, right? And so I felt like we sidestepped it a bit. So I think you got to be consistent with your capacity, what your calling is, what the issues are, and in the right context. And that's what is really important for me right off the start.
Okay, do any of the panelists want to add any other comments based on what they've heard? Go ahead, Paul.
I just want to stress the importance of contacting those that you want to submit a letter of support for you. That's something that you need to start early in the process, because when you identify those partners that you want to write a letter, it's not a good idea to start when the proposal is due. So I would suggest you start that very early on to identify those, and letters of support are very important as well.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to point out, and that the comments of the panel made me think about this. The applications are assigned to reviewers, and every application by law has to have 3 reviews on file. So the reviewers do their review individually, and they'll give it a score based on the evaluation criteria. Then we meet as an entire panel, and each application is discussed by all the reviewers. So the 3 people that have actually reviewed it carefully tell the panel what it's all about, and then the entire panel will discuss the application. And so when we talk about funding categories, do not fund, low priority, medium priority, that's priority for funding. That's not, well, this is a medium quality application. It might be an excellent application, but given that panel and that program and the amount of money that's available, it's medium priority for funding, okay? And then high priority for funding and outstanding. I always tell my panel, if it's outstanding, we got to rob Fort Knox to get the money to fund those applications, because they are truly, need to be funded. So I just want to make sure that everyone in the audience understands that part of the panel process, that if you get a medium priority for funding, that doesn't mean that your idea was ho-hum. That means you had a great idea, but in that context, and in comparison to all the other applications that are in that competition, it falls into that funding category. Any other comments? Go ahead, Penny.
One thing I can't overemphasize, lots of times, especially crops, the SCRIs, require outreach of some sort, and this is probably the most overlooked part that people will put together in the grants. Many universities have an extension component. The land grants generally have an extension component. Private universities generally do not. The private universities think the land grants are really lucky because they have that already built in, and sometimes the land grants completely ignore it. And this is probably your best means for these SERIs. If you incorporate that extension component at the very beginning, not at the end where it looks like it's an add-on, but you do it at the very beginning so it's very clear that the extension is going to play a very important role. And the thing also goes with the stakeholders, the letters of support. It's very important that you have enough letters. You don't want to have like 20 or 50, but you want to have enough from important stakeholders to show that they think that your research is important. Because if you don't have any, that's not going to go very far. For whatever program you're looking at, you have to have some sort of letter of support saying that somebody from outside thinks it's important to them. But I can't overemphasize the fact that, and I know there's going to be a talk later on this, to try and incorporate that outreach component. It might be something to do with the schools. It might be something to do with children, or it might be, you know, straight grower type extension components, but it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be very clear through the whole proposal that you're going to be doing that, and that you have the people set up for it.
Okay, great. So with that introduction, we'll throw it open for questions. Where's my audience plant that was supposed to ask a question?
I wanted to know if the panel could speak more about the content of letters of support, in terms of what do you expect a strong letter of support to contain?
I'm assuming it would probably vary a little bit among panelists, but I think most people are looking that that's a sincere interest in the project. It's not, oh, I have a friend who works with a seed company or a chemical company, and they'll write a letter saying they think this is a great idea and it would be wonderful if this was done. You're looking for a sincere involvement in the project. Matter of fact, some of the activities may be even done by that person who's writing the letter of support. They would be involved in the project, much as we said earlier about all the individuals working on the project. It should be very clear how they're involved in the project, what they're doing. To me, the letters of support, it should be really clear what that person or entity or company is bringing to the table and how they're going to be involved in the project, what they're going to do, how they're going to influence the outcome.
I guess, you know, as I think about that, that's a question that goes actually pretty deep, because specifically in that letter for support, you know, that the stakeholder identifies the issues and how this addresses their issues, and what they might see as an outcome of what this work will do for their industry or for that stakeholder group. And what I mean by being a little deeper is because that stakeholder is probably someone that you've had a relationship with for quite a long time, and or are building a new relationship. If it's a stakeholder group, you know, the shift in funding mechanisms have been that there needs to be documented evidence that this is an identified need by the stakeholder group. And so one of the things you do is work with your stakeholders to help them document. So if they have a little bit of funding, and I work with some commodity groups, and they can give about $2,000 or $3,000 per year to, you know, 5, 10 PIs in the state. But you know what? They have an annual meeting. They document what their priorities are. They say, these are our priorities. And then that gets put into the proposal or in the stakeholder letter. Over the last 7 years, we have identified this as a priority. We have given $6,500 each year of funding. We have supported this stakeholder, and we consider this a priority, and we have invested in this. And those kind of letters turn commodity-based funding $1 to $40 back on their investment. And you think, well, you know, those are nickel and dime kind of things. You got to do a lot of paperwork for a little bit of money. But if you know your issues of the stakeholders and they're with you, then that's where it really makes a strong proposal.
I think one of the most challenging things is if you're in a large state with a huge commodity group, it's so much easier to demonstrate support from a support letter than if you're from a state with many, many, many small specialty crops, or in some cases where you have almost no specialty crops. And so you have to get very imaginative with some of these letters. You know, in some cases you may have to go outside the state support groups for commodities and go to, if there's a national working group or some sort of national connection that you can make in order to try and get those letters of support. And many times you can just do a cold contact to them and email them and say, hey, this is the idea I have, outline what it is, and ask them if what their interests are, what do they think, and then maybe help them phrase what needs to be in the letter or give them some ideas of how to construct the letter so it will come across as something besides, yeah, I support John Doe. And make sure that your letter fully meets the guidelines of the RFA.
At the university level, we spend a lot of time working on the budgets, So as a panelist, how much does that budget play into your decision making?
For me, it tends to be the last thing I look at, but it is important. You know, we've all sweated over those contracts and grants forms and trying to get the dollar figures right, and especially with the matching type systems with SCRIs, they're very painful. So it's not that the reviewer is not going to look at the budget. The reviewer will look at the budget and they will say, hey, you know, this guy's got 3 international trips planned. Why? Things like that. They will throw up some red flags. Usually that's what you look for first, or at least I look for first as a panelist. And then the other important thing is many times when you see a budget of $2.5 million, you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of money. But if you've got 30 people listed as collaborators and PIs, you sit down and kind of do the math in your head and going, well, is this actually an underfunded project? So even though you're talking about masses of money, you still have to look at the individual components, and is this work going to be able to get done, or are these people actually going to be spending resources outside the grant in order to get it done?
And maybe this is a bit subjective, and I agree with Penny. I tend to look at the budgets last. You know, it was articulated, you look for good science, you look for novel ideas, look for novel approaches. And in the budget, I scan through and this is way out of line. You know, so those things pop out to you. But the subjective component, I think, is what are they investing in? Are they investing in infrastructure and technicians? And you know, unfortunately, that's happening more and more. So this is maybe to university administrators, is when there's a lot of infrastructure and support for the program, that starts to detract. But if you're investing in graduate students, tomorrow's workforce, then that, I think, yeah, this is good, you know. They're not only advancing the science, they're advancing the education of the next generation. So those kind of things kind of pop out a little bit more in the budget. Where are you putting your money? And so that's a subjective thing. It doesn't get ranked a lot, but it can tip the scale and promote a grant in a certain way.
I agree 100% with Frank on that, and the budget is the last thing I look at. I assume that the university has run the numbers, and that the grant program is running the numbers. But when I do look at it, I don't look at it to see if anything balances. I look for those big categories that Frank and Penny talked about. Are they investing in things that are going to help progress the RFA, or are they trying to build infrastructure for the university that's not really impressive if you're building infrastructure for the university and you're not really getting what the RFA is all about out of it? I think also you look for those large categories where someone's asking for a whole lot of money for a little bit of effort, and then there's another category in the same grant where they're asking for very little money for a huge effort. And that imbalance, like we said on the other factors, that when there's a team there, particularly if they're team grants, that the team is fairly distributed and everybody's doing what they need to do and everybody's treated fairly on the team. That's sort of, to me, a negative if you have one person taking a lot of money and 5 other people taking very little money and they're actually doing more of the work. And that's, in my mind, sort of lowers the importance of that. So, because I've found that if you have a team and people on the team are not treated well, it doesn't work as a team. It just never does.
And just one other entity is not only with the team within an institution, but if you have a multi-institutional application, you need to look at the allocation of the other institutions and the salary and the resources that they will be provided with as well.
Tom, I have a question.
Okay.
And this is not a planted question, by the way. Each of the panelists talked about what they look for in a proposal, and I think it's worth noting for everyone that for any given panel, a panelist may review 8 to 15 different proposals. And in many cases, especially if these are large, complex grant applications, not everything you read is in your wheelhouse, correct?
That's correct.
Can you give the potential grant applicants some guidance to write to not just their niche expertise, but also to a broader panel of reasonably intelligent scientists?
Yes, that's something. That's a very excellent point, and I think that when you're serving on a panel that has an expectation of a broad expertise, a cooperation across discipline lines, you have to write, in my opinion, to a very educated audience, but not to a specific audience. So if you're a crop physiologist, you don't write to crop physiology. If you're a pathologist, you don't write to pathology. You write at a level that a non-pathologist can understand the pathology, or a non-crop physiologist can understand the crop physiology. That's not saying you're dumbing it down. You're not. You're writing at an educated level, but in a clear level. And I think one key factor of that is if you have an economist and a pathologist and a physiologist and a biochemist on your team, they've written these sections. I think it's probably pretty good to make sure that each of you thoroughly read the whole thing, make sure all your partners are invested in this so that everybody understands it. Then go out and find someone at your university that you can draw a big favor on and say, and someone who's not a biochemist or someone who's not in any of your disciplines, but who's also a professor in a relevant category, would you review this for us and tell us, is it really clear to you? Do the concepts, and have them tell you what they think you're asking and what they think you're going to provide. And if it's not clear to them, it's not going to be clear to a panelist on the review. So.
I might add to that one of the most common things that happens, especially in a multi-institution or multi-team approach, everybody loves to do their methodology in really technical language, and they get into all kinds of abbreviations and a lot of detail. And with many of these large grants, it's not about detail. It's about how it all fits together. You know, you can cut down on your page limit, get within your page limit, and also at the same time get a level of brevity that people can understand simply by referencing your methodology to several key papers. And also, this is where it really helps to have an outside person going through it that's not familiar with this area, so they can look at it and say, so what? I don't know how many pages of methods I've scratched out because, you know, it's not adding anything to your argument. You're using a method simply as documentation of that they're valid and that they'll help support what you're trying to do. It's not going to be your justification for doing the work.
Just an observation from me, and then I do have a question for the panel. But so Paula talked about making sure that you go out and engage your stakeholders early in the process, and Carl's talking about having each person on the team review it and then send it out for independent review. So to me, what I'm hearing is don't wait until the dean sends you a notice that the RFA has been published and you got 60 days to respond, because you're not going to be able to respond in a successful way. You want to build these teams long before the RFA comes out. I mean, the RFAs don't change that much year to year. Sometimes the priorities do change, as Penny pointed out. But the overall program is the overall program. And so you want to look for those programs that fit your science, and then start building your, if it requires a multidisciplinary team, start building that team ahead of time. Bring in your stakeholders and get that process started long before the RFA comes out, because, particularly with the electronic submission, your grants office is going to say, no, we want that application 2-3 weeks before the due date. So now you've got 5 or 6 weeks to write the thing. So if you're waiting till the RFA comes out, please, well, I can't say don't send them in, but the chance of success goes down exponentially with how late you wait to get it started. So the question I had, though, relates back to that letter of recommendation you get from your stakeholders. You guys talked a lot about commodity groups, and so you have that's a very targeted stakeholder group. But one of the research objectives here at NCA&T is childhood obesity. Now, I'm a production ag guy, but I can't think of any stakeholders for childhood obesity. How would you go about getting letters of support for projects that don't deal with a commodity-specific issue?
In this case, you will reach out to the cooperative extension. I know that I work with some of the local and state extension offices here that reach out to the 4-H youth groups. So that will be an excellent target area for you, as well as it is quite difficult to get into the school systems, but it's possible if you identify the school system and you've built a relationship with the principal or teacher at the school, it's possible for that to occur, to go through the public schools as well. So 4-H youth, I would highly suggest that route.
One of the ones I'm always learning, and one of the ones that just came to my attention probably in the last year is that, and now I'm down in Kannapolis near Charlotte, but the local hospitals have a huge obesity outreach effort going on, and these people are so well trained. And this is definitely an angle worth pursuing, because these people know how to write grants, they know exactly what you're asking for, and so it's an excellent idea to go to those. They have a lot of clinical or outreach type training that goes on with obesity, and particularly childhood obesity. So it's a great resource to go to. Also, if you're going into the school system, look for who the school nutritionist or dietitian is, because many times they're very happy to work with you as well.
Carl, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that was a good summary. I would add that there are some non-government organizations that you can work with, not on obesity, but we worked on looking at the horticultural aspects of nutrition from horticultural sources a few years ago, and worked with a project with a non-government organization looking at, these were parents of the children involved with a particular disease, and they had ideas. They had done the same kind of things at commodity groups that Frank discussed, where they felt like there were certain things in the diet of their children that was causing this problem. So they essentially wrote very strong letters of support for the project, stating that they'd like to see this research done. They, and you're talking about several thousands of people in that organization who are passionate about their children. So I think you could probably take the same approach in this childhood obesity area.
You got a question back there?
When you're reviewing proposals that have minority set aside, is your review when you have a large institution and a small institution combining for this project? Do you have any kind of special approach to how you look at that so that the large institution doesn't garnish a lion's share?
When I'm reviewing the proposal itself, I don't look at that aspect. I have to look at the quality, how well it's written, no matter where it's from, what the ideas are, and make sure it meets all the other things we've talked about. Then when you're looking at that particular issue, it would be like the other issue that I mentioned earlier, is that you look for disproportionate, irregardless of whether it's a minority institution and a larger institution, or whether it's a biochemist over in one department and a pathologist in another department. If the budget is disproportional to the effort, you definitely look at that, because then that's not a team. If it's a team, the budget should be proportional to effort, irregardless of who you're looking at, to me. So I take that approach, and making sure that whoever's on there is involved, they're doing their job, and that they're getting a fair share for what they're doing on the proposal.
Yeah, I would say also in the way these are developed, and also you can quickly pick it up off the pages. Is it a truly participatory process? And that's very important. Yeah.
I think one thing that was hit on a little while ago, and you need to keep in mind, and of course I'm biased. There's certain large universities that I'd rather see the little guy win, but one of the things besides the science that you're looking for is the fact that you have to think about taxpayers and tax dollars. And is this grant that you're proposing to fund going to meet that requirement? Are they going to be able to deliver? Because ultimately you're the one that's responsible for giving a green light to a project. And if that project's not going to be fulfilled, then it kind of comes back a little bit on you individually that for whatever reason, I as a panelist missed this critical aspect of a project. So always keep that in mind. We're still answering to taxpayers in this process.
Delve more into the participatory process, sir. Delve more into the participatory process you talked about.
Oh, I think we're the participatory process, and it really is right up front. Whoever's leading it, that they get the right type of players at the table up front, that that those players mutually identify what the objectives are, and then they also, everybody has their gifts, talents, and strengths, and it's really exciting when everybody comes to the table and everybody brings that to the table, and you have a product that represents everybody that's at the table and developing that proposal. And I think as a panelist, you can quickly pick that up. Is this an issues-driven and participatory process where everybody had that level of input consistent with their expertise and their experience? So yeah, is that helpful? Yeah. Okay.
Now, one of the things that I've seen evolve over probably the last 5 years is that, it used to be you went around your department trying to find somebody to do a component of this grant, making them fit what you wanted in the grant. That has completely changed, and the successful grants now are looking for experts. So that, they don't care where you're from or who you are. What they're looking for is, okay, who has the best expertise for this particular component of my grant? Another thing we haven't touched on yet is project directors. And I'm telling you, when you have a $2 million or a $5 million grant, you really want to think about putting money into a salary for a project director. There is nothing harder than being the principal director and being the researcher, extension educator on top of that. You really want to put this management system into somebody else's hands for you. They don't have to have a PhD, but just somebody with strong organizational skills who's good about meeting deadlines and keeping up, and really what I call the terrier effect, somebody who's good at nipping at the heels of some of the, many times, you'll have somebody on your project who just won't meet the deadlines. And you have to have somebody who's really good about following up and making sure that person is kept in line and that all the reports are filed on time and that everybody's clear about where they're going and what they're doing.
And just to add to that statement, it's very important that your current and pending form is current and up to date, and it really reflects what you are being able to do and commit yourself to doing on a project. Because we look at the current and pending, and if you have 7 or 8 grants and you're stating that your involvement in this particular grant is 100%, we're going to look at this and say, how is this possible that you have all of these other active grants and you want to take on this grant with so much involvement in it? So just really make sure the current and pending is current, and if you're heavily involved, make sure you involve other directors or investigators that can take on some of the responsibilities.
Hi, I was wondering if you might, if maybe you've noticed any common challenges for new young investigators who are trying to break into the funding scene?
I think we probably all agree the first thing as a new investigator, you're always trying to ask, you're offering to do far too much that you can't get done. It's very hard for new researchers to figure out that, no, you can't get this done in 3 to 4 years. And even now, for me, it's still difficult to say, okay, can I truly manage this much research? You have to be, it's so hard to figure out, okay, can I really get this done in 4 years, or can I not get this done in 4 years?
I think it's exciting to see new investigators, and I think generally panels want to enable that. But of course, it has to be consistent with the science, and it has to be consistent with the possibility of outcomes and stuff like that. So I guess the thing that I would advise is kind of gets back to a total picture. You're not just doing a project. This proposal is just not one shot in the dark. You're developing a program, and you want to sell your program. And if it's like stated, if it's an interdisciplinary panel, you want to be able to offer enough information for other disciplines to understand the context of your work, but you also want to show the depth of your expertise. So there's a balance. It's just like writing a good abstract. You got a lot of people that read it, and you want to sell the idea, but then you also want to show people that, hey, you got really good data. And so I guess that same thing is, don't just see this proposal as a project. See this proposal as one mechanism to enhance your program and sell your program.
I agree with Frank on that. And if there was one thing that you do see, because there's a very refreshing zeal that comes with young, enthusiastic first-time investigators or second-time that they've written a proposal. But if there is a tendency, it is that they tend to get overly zealous about one particular aspect of the science and not pay enough attention to the rest of the balance and how it fits a programmatic view. And that's not to say that they can't, but if you haven't written one before, definitely make sure that when you get your science in there, you have other people read it again, and make sure that you're selling the program, like Frank said, not just one area of the science that you're very excited about. You don't want to ever lose that enthusiasm about your area of the science. You just want to make sure that the write-up is written so that other people see that enthusiasm, but also get the impression that, hey, yeah, but you also know how this fits this program.
I want to add one more thing on that. There's a lot of new scientist programs out there, or young scientist programs. Certainly take advantage of those, because those are tailored for people who are just starting out and have great data and have the zeal and the things like that. When you get into these really large projects, the big AFRI projects, you're looking at components. So one of the other things that happens is there's people either don't put in any data, any preliminary data to show that their idea is solid, or they put in way too much. So keep your preliminary data maybe for another type of project or another type of organization. But these large grants are more about component fitting, particularly the SCRIs are more about component fitting and not about necessarily, hey, this is new bridge of science. That those might be NSF type ideas. Here you're trying to put things together in a multiple package that will reach the maximum number of people possible, not just more researchers or one academic group.
If I could add just one thing before Tom goes to the next question, assuming the panel's done. 2 years ago, we had a workshop sort of like this at Washington State University, and one of the presentations was by Brenda Schrader, who's a young investigator, and she laid out all the trials and tribulations that she went through trying to get a big project, and it's actually a great human interest story too. So I would encourage you to go back. You can find that on our website. You can find the link for that presentation on our website. Go back and watch that. I think it addresses a lot of the issues and concerns you might have as a young investigator.
Any other comments from the panel on that question?
Just Penny's comment on the components. I agree with that, but personally, when I'm looking at these, I would like to see the very best. If you had economics and pathology and physiology example, I would like to see the very best cutting edge of each of the three, but they got to be put together in a way that relationship, to keep pounding on that relationship of how they're going to work together to solve the problem that you're proposing is more critical than either of the individuals. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the best science in each of those individual areas. You should. But it's more important how you put them together to explain how they're going to work together. So.
I think that's always been one of the big challenges for me or other people that were trained in a more traditional background. What you're doing here is very unique because you're taking the best science, but you're combining it across disciplines, and this is something that is so hard for us that were traditionally trained in one department, and you didn't cross the boundaries. You sure didn't look outside your college, and that's probably the hardest thing in the world to figure out how to do. How do you make this a novel approach? How do you make it the best science, and how do you make it come up with a fantastic way to solve an issue? And it really does require thinking far outside your area of comfort and probably more imagination and creativity than I'd ever be capable of. But when it works, it's phenomenal. When you see it actually work in some of these outstanding proposals, it's a really good feeling to see that.
Okay, so we have a question from our off-site audience, and I just would like to remind our off-site audience that you can submit questions via email. That email address is info@ag.ncat.edu. So we only have one, and there's supposed to be 300 of you out there. Come on, let's get with it. Okay, so the question comes from Texas Tech. It says, as some people may not be familiar with the review process, would you please review the roles of NPL versus manager and how funding decisions and ranking are made? So I'll start out. I am an MPL, so I can tell you about that part of it. The national program leader is the program director, so that we have many different hats that we wear, and one of those is program director. Our role is to, based on stakeholder input and the congressional intent, is to write the request for applications. So that is probably the biggest influence that we have on a particular program, is that we're the ones who develop the request for applications. The other influence that we have on the program is that we select the panel manager. And so we do that based on our knowledge of the program, our knowledge of the science, and our knowledge of people. Because the program manager, or panel manager I should say, not program manager, the panel manager is an extremely important person. The panel manager helps the program director select all the reviewers, and then the panel manager is the person who assigns applications to reviewers for review. And so that's a very important process, and I don't know if any of you have been panel managers and can talk to that, but it can be very frustrating if the applicant doesn't do a good job of identifying all potential conflicts of interest. Applications get assigned and then have to be reassigned, and we want to keep workloads pretty even, so that can become very difficult. And we have a timeline, okay? We have a deadline for applications. We have a date that the panel's going to meet. All those reviews have to be submitted by law, and so that can be very distracting if we have to keep reassigning and so on. As far as so that's the program director writes the RFA, it selects the panel manager, and then you guys want to talk about the ranking process?
I'll speak first. I had the privilege of being a panel member, not for a NIFA thing, but you know, it does take a lot of work, but it was really powerful, because you get all these proposals and you try to find the best people in the nation. And I just want to, again, I want to offer assurance about the process, that it's a very productive process, I think. You know, so you try to find the best people in the nation who could specifically review these proposals. And it's nice if you get an idea ahead, because a lot of times you have to develop that panel ahead of time. But you try to get the best people at the table. Also, you try to get people that have a diversity of experiences and backgrounds. And so you get that balanced opinion that you really want out of a panel.
So we talked a little bit about the ranking system earlier, the different categories, and that's been covered. One thing I did want to address, Dr. Lowe's was talking about finding panel members. This is where you really want to have new scientists, because these people are the cutting edge. They're in that area. Those are the people who are the freshest, and they have the most in-depth background. So if you ever have a chance to serve on that as a new scientist, or if you're interested, make sure that you get the word out whatever way you need to, because it's invaluable experience when you're helping to write your own grants, and it's invaluable experience to meet other people. At some of these panels, you meet people who you might become collaborators with at some point in your career. I'm not sure in terms of ranking proposals. I mean, we've already covered the DNF, medium priority, and all that with the.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that, and I just wanted to reinforce what Penny was just saying. And what I said when we introduced the panel. One of the best ways to be successful as a grant applicant is to serve as a reviewer on a grant panel. If you want to volunteer to be a reviewer on one of our grant panels, just send me an email. tbewick@nifa.usda.gov. And I'll put your name into, you can't hear me? Say it again. Okay? tbewick@nifa.usda.gov. And I'll make sure that your name gets into our database, and then make sure I need your expertise and those sorts of, that kind of information. If you got a one-page CV, something like that, we'll get you in the database, and believe me, we are always looking for reviewers. It's not everybody can do it all the time, and we don't like to use the same people over and over again. And so new reviewers are very, Dan, there's a question back here, very valuable commodity. Just to finish up on how the ranking is done, and how that works into the decision making. As I indicated, every application is discussed during the review process. And I always go like this because in the meeting room on the wall, we have the categories. And so once the application is discussed, we ask the review team, okay, which category does this fall into? And so they'll, you know, I always Vanna White, I walk up like this, you know, and they say, medium, no, lower, higher. So we wind up putting it into one of those ranking categories. After all the applications have been discussed, we go back and we do what we call re-ranking. And we go category by category and we say, okay, should this is an outstanding, should it go down to high priority? Should anything in high priority go up to outstanding or down to medium? And we do that for each one of the categories. Once we've got all the categories, you know, set, then we go application by application and we say which is the best application in this category. And we rank the applications. Let's say we have 110, we rank them from 1 to 110. And then when we recommend applications for funding, we start at number 1 and we go down the list until we run out of money. Okay? So it's real important to be as high on that list as you can be. All right? Because if you're at 9 and we only have enough money to fund 8, I'm sorry, you know. Now, one of the things that we have to do as NPLs for most programs, some of our programs, money can be carried over from one year to the next. But in most of our programs, we have to spend all the money in the fiscal year that it's given to us. And so we have to make sure that the programs come out to the penny. And so what we might do is we might, you know, we get down towards that where, you know, we call it the funding line, and we might go down and take an application that's ranked a little bit lower because it fits how much money we have left. I don't like to, you know, say, well, we only have enough money to fund a third of your application. Can you rewrite it so that you don't really do anything meaningful? I would rather go down a little bit and find an application that we can fully fund so that we have the impacts that we want to have with our programs. So that's how those decisions are made, and that's how that ranking process goes. So we had a question in the back.
No, actually, Tom, I answered the question in her ear, so it was, and we had an interesting discussion. We got a number of online questions here.
Oh, okay,
Let's
go
try
ahead.
and get to these. Open that one up again. Yeah, let's, because it's just a quickie. Okay, someone was asking again about how they should become a reviewer. You talked about that, but they also asked what are the requirements, and that was. I had a side discussion with the woman in the back, so if you can talk a little bit about that.
The requirements are that you have you have blood pressure and a pulse, and that you're a scientific expert. Okay, you know, just willingness to serve on a panel. You know, if you have never done it before, it is a challenging thing. You're going to be asked to review. Sometimes depends on the program, and now there's all kinds of pressure on us to reduce travel budgets. You might be asked to review, not reduce, review 20 proposals. These are 25-page applications plus all the, you know, some of them work out to be 600-700 pages with letters of support and on and on. So it's a very time-consuming process, and it's a volunteer. We're not paying you to do this, okay? So we do give you an honorarium. If you're not a federal employee, we'll give you an honorarium for every day that you spend in the panel meeting itself, but we don't give you any money to do the reviews. So the willingness to volunteer to serve your country is really important, okay?
Just a clarifying question from Rapid City, South Dakota. You mentioned...
Yes, it's winter.
Yeah. Yeah. She wants to know how to get out of there. No, no, she just wanted to clarify an RFA is a request for applications. She just missed that little piece. And when I was talking to the woman in back, this is another question, and I think you covered this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How do you go about selecting the proposal to fund if you have fundable proposals with high ranking but not enough money to fund all of them? Did you really cover that cutoff?
Just to reiterate, we start at the top. We start at the one application that's ranked number 1, and we go down the list. As we get down to the point where we don't have enough money to fully fund the next application, we'll look, we don't go, let's say if we're in outstanding, we won't dip down to medium priority just because that application has a budget that fits how much money we have. But we try to find an application that we can fully fund that's within the same funding category. And then if we can't, what we will do is we'll say, we might negotiate with the applicant. We say, well, we only have half the money that you're asking for, but you're asking for 4 years. How about we'll give you 2 years of funding and then you come back for additional funding. Okay, so Dan's given me the cut sign. I want to thank our panelists. Can we give them a round of applause, please? And I want to thank everybody for their excellent questions, and we're going to just move ahead.